Have you ever felt trapped in a life that seemed perfect, but deep down wasn't truly yours? I'm 35 years old, married for 8 years, with a solid career and a comfortable life. On paper, everything was precisely where it should be. But there was a weekend at the beach that shattered the entire facade I had spent years meticulously constructing. Today, you'll learn what happened when pretending became unsustainable. Let me tell you what my life was like before that weekend. From the outside, I was the perfect example of someone who had followed all the right rules. College, graduate school, stable job. At 27, I met Renata. She was everything anyone could want: caring, intelligent, committed. Our friends said we were the perfect couple. Our families loved the idea of us together. And I married her because, rationally, it made complete sense. But there's something insidious about living the life others expect of you. You become incredibly adept at silencing that little voice deep inside. The voice that whispers that something isn't quite right. That something fundamental is missing. I had become a master at suppressing that inner truth. During the first years of marriage, I could convince myself that everything was fine. We had a comfortable routine. Dinners with friends on Saturdays. Trips planned months in advance. Discussions about when we would have children. I participated in all of this as if it were natural. As if it were really mine. But when I was alone, especially in the early hours of the morning, when Renata slept beside me, that feeling would return. An incompleteness I couldn't name. It was as if I were watching my own life from the outside, knowing I was playing a role, but without the courage to admit it to anyone, not even to myself. I had never directly confronted my sexuality. I recognized those fleeting moments, glances, and thoughts that didn't align with what I believed I should feel. But from an early age, we're taught to bury such uncertainties, aren't we? Society insists that by 35, you must have life completely figured out. You should know yourself with absolute certainty. And admitting you don't? Acknowledging that you might have constructed an entire existence around a self-deception? That's absolutely terrifying. The hardest part wasn't even the confusion about who I was attracted to. The hardest part was the guilt. I would look at Renata and see a wonderful person who didn't deserve to be married to someone who was just following a script. She deserved to be truly loved, in that way that makes you feel like you've found your other half. And no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much effort I put in, I knew I couldn't give her that. But how do you admit that? How do you go to someone you promised to love forever and say, "Sorry, but I think I was lying, not to you, to myself"? The fear of disappointment, the fear of hurting someone you care about, the fear of judgment from family, friends, from society itself. All of this paralyzes you. So you continue. You wake up, go to work, come home, smile, participate in conversations, make love without true passion, and pretend that everything is fine. It got to a point where I was so good at pretending that even I had forgotten I was pretending. The mask had fused with my face. I had become the person everyone expected me to be, and the person I really was remained suffocated underneath, screaming for air. But I refused to listen. It was against this backdrop that the invitation arrived. Every year, our close-knit group of couple friends would organize a weekend at the beach. The tradition was simple: rent a spacious house, cook communal meals, build a bonfire on the sand, and drink wine well into the night. Typically, I would have looked forward to it. It was a welcome break from our monotonous routine, a rare opportunity to truly unwind. But that year, when Renata mentioned the weekend, I felt something different. A resistance. A desire to make up an excuse and not go. I can't explain why. It was as if some part of me knew something was going to happen. As if my unconscious was trying to protect me from a truth I wasn't ready to face yet. But I didn't make up any excuse. I did what I always did. I agreed, smiled, and we started preparing for the weekend. The trip was uneventful. 4 hours in the car listening to a shared playlist, stopping to grab food at a diner halfway, talking about work and plans for the rest of the year. Renata was excited. She loved these gatherings with friends. And me? I was on autopilot, as always. When we arrived at the house, there was already another couple there, Felipe and Mariana, whom we had known for years. Hugs, laughter, that initial excitement of reuniting with dear friends. We unloaded the bags, chose our room, and I went to help organize things in the kitchen. That's when I heard the front door opening again. New voices. More people arriving. I had my back turned, putting some beers in the fridge, when I heard Felipe say, "Everyone, I want to introduce you to Rodrigo, my cousin. He just got separated, so I insisted he come with us, to relax a bit." I turned around to greet him, and it was in that second that everything changed. Rodrigo was around 33, with slightly tousled brown hair and a meticulously groomed beard, embodying that effortlessly confident demeanor. When our eyes met, something deep within me stirred instantaneously. This wasn't mere physical attraction. It was profound recognition. It was as if a dormant part of myself, long suppressed, suddenly burst through its carefully constructed barriers and declared, "I'm still here. I've always been here." I extended my hand to greet him. He shook it firmly, smiled, and said, "Nice to meet you, I'm Rodrigo." His voice was calm, deep, resonant, and I, straining to appear composed, mumbled a generic, "Nice to meet you, welcome." But inside, my heart was thundering in a way I couldn't comprehend. The rest of that first afternoon dissolved into a haze. More couples trickled in. We arranged the dinner table on the veranda. Someone started playing music. Conversations drifted between laughter and shared stories. Everything seemed utterly ordinary. Yet I could feel his gaze, not intrusive, but distinctly curious, as if he too had sensed that electric moment during our handshake and was quietly trying to decipher its meaning. I fought to avert my gaze, to blend in. I was desperate not to let Renata or anyone else detect the seismic shift happening within me. Internally, I was unraveling. Because in that single, searing moment when our eyes met, all the carefully constructed walls I'd built over years began to splinter and crumble. When night came, the group decided to make a bonfire on the beach. We grabbed blankets, more beer, and headed down to the sand. The sky was clear, full of stars. The sound of the waves created that hypnotic rhythm that makes you relax without realizing it. Everyone spread out around the fire, talking in small groups. And then Rodrigo sat down next to me. It wasn't on purpose, at least it didn't seem so. He just arrived with a beer in his hand, looked at the empty space beside me, and sat down. Renata was a few meters away, laughing at something Mariana had said. I stayed there, looking at the fire, trying to control the confusion that was happening inside me. Rodrigo didn't say anything for a few minutes. He just sat there, looking at the fire too, drinking his beer. And then, without looking at me, he said quietly, "Beautiful night, isn't it?" I agreed. It is. Very beautiful. Silence again. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a silence that seemed to carry weight, as if we both knew something was happening, but neither of us knew how to name it. And then he turned to me, looked directly into my eyes, and said something I'll never forget. "You seem like someone who's carrying a weight that no one else can see." My heart stopped, because he had just put into words exactly what I had been feeling for years. And for the first time in my life, someone had seen through the mask. In that moment, at that bonfire, with the sound of the waves in the background, and the warmth of the fire illuminating his face, I realized something that would change everything. I couldn't pretend anymore. The conversation started there, on the beach, with the sound of the waves in the background and that warmth in my chest that I couldn't name. But then he changed his tone. He asked me if I was happy. Not, "Are you happy right now?" but, "Are you happy?" As if he could see right through me. And I didn't know how to answer. I stayed silent, looking at the fire, trying to find an answer that wouldn't hurt so much. But he didn't insist. He just stayed there beside me, waiting. And that patience, of his, that way of being present without pressuring, completely disarmed me. That's when I told the truth. I talked about my marriage, about how I loved my wife, but how something in me always seemed to be missing. How I spent years trying to fit my feelings into a box that never quite fit. And as I spoke, he just listened. He didn't judge me. He didn't try to fix anything. He just saw me. and for the first time in my life, I felt understood without having to explain every detail. When I finished speaking, he looked at me and said, "I understand. More than you can imagine." And then it was his turn. He told me about his own doubts, about how he also struggled for years to accept who he really was, how the pressure from family, friends, society weighed on him until one day he decided he had to choose between living a comfortable lie or risking everything for the truth. I listened to every word of his as if it were the first time someone spoke my language. Every sentence resonated within me, awakening something I had buried long ago. And in that moment, there on the beach, I realized I wasn't alone, that there was someone in the world who understood exactly what I felt. We stayed talking until late. Hours passed like minutes. And when we finally got up to leave, he invited me to walk on the beach the next day, at sunrise. I hesitated for a second. Part of me knew that accepting that invitation was taking a step towards something dangerous. But the other part, the part that had just awakened, couldn't say no. "I'll go," I said, and I saw his smile. A genuine smile, full of anticipation. On Saturday morning at 5:30, I was on the beach. The sky was still dark, but it was beginning to lighten on the horizon. And there he was, waiting for me. He didn't say anything. He just started walking beside me, bare feet in the cold sand. We walked in silence for a while. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was one of those silences that say more than 1,000 words. I felt his presence beside me like a magnet. Each step seemed to pull me closer. That's when he stopped, looked at the horizon and said, "You know what I've learned all these years? That life doesn't change the answers, it changes the questions." I looked at him without understanding, and he continued. "Before I used to ask myself, how do I fit into what they expect of me? Today, I ask myself, how can I live in a way that's true to myself?" Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach, because I realized I had spent years trying to answer the wrong question, trying to fit in, adapt, mold myself, and I had never stopped to ask if that life was really mine. He turned to me and said softly, "You don't have to decide anything now. Just don't lie to yourself." And in that moment, I felt it. An overwhelming urge to be closer to him, to touch, to feel, to let that rising emotion consume me. But I held back, not yet, because part of me was still resisting, still afraid. The morning passed. We went back to the house, each to our own room. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every word he had said echoed in my head, and the guilt started to creep in. I loved my wife. How could I be feeling this for someone else? How could I be betraying her, even if only in my thoughts? I spent the rest of Saturday in conflict. I tried to convince myself it was just a passing crisis, that when I got back home, everything would return to normal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true, because for the first time in my life, I had felt alive. And now that I had tasted that feeling, it was impossible to pretend it didn't exist. That evening I met him again. This time, on the deck outside. He was alone, having a beer, looking at the ocean. I sat next to him without saying anything, and we stayed there, the two of us, in silence again. But this time, the silence was charged. I felt the tension in the air, felt my heart beating faster, felt that something was about to happen. That's when he turned to me and asked, "Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life?" I took a deep breath. "Every day," I answered, and he nodded as if he already knew. Me too, for a long time, until one day I realized I was 35 years old. And I asked myself, how many more years am I going to live a lie? How many more years am I going to pretend I'm okay when inside I'm falling apart? And in that moment, something inside me broke. All the barriers I had built, all the fears, all the excuses, crumbled. I looked at him and said without thinking, "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle what I'm feeling." We stayed there, with our hands touching, for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. And then he stood up and said, "Let's walk." I followed. We walked to the beach again. But this time, everything seemed different. The air was heavier, the sound of the waves louder, my heart faster. We stopped at an isolated spot, far from the house lights, and he turned to me. "Can I ask you a question?" he said. I nodded. "Have you ever allowed yourself to feel what you really want to feel? Without fear, without guilt, without judgment?" I didn't answer, because the answer was no, never, and he knew it. I'm not saying you need to act. I'm not saying you need to change your whole life tonight. But I just want you to know that, whatever you're feeling, it's okay. And I understand. He took a step back, as if to leave, but I held his arm. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time I allowed myself to feel. "I don't want you to go," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know what this means. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I don't want you to go." He looked at me with an intensity that pierced through my defenses. Then deliberately slow, he drew closer, so near I could feel the warmth of his breath, and whispered almost inaudibly, "Can I kiss you?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, and he kissed me. It was a slow kiss, full of care, full of truth, and in that moment, everything made sense. Because that kiss wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. It was as if I had finally found the missing piece. When we separated, I was trembling. Not from cold, from fear, from relief, from emotion. He held my face in his hands and said, "You don't have to be afraid. Not with me." And for the first time, I believed. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel without trying to control everything, without trying to fit into a box, just feel. We spent the rest of the night talking, walking, sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing. And with every passing minute, I felt like I was getting to know myself again, as if I had spent years looking at a distorted reflection of myself, and was finally seeing the real image. When the sun began to rise, I knew that weekend had changed everything. And the guilt was still there. Of course it was, because I loved my wife. But now I understood that what I felt for her wasn't any less real, just because I had discovered a part of myself I didn't know. He told me, before we said goodbye that morning, "Guilt isn't a sign that you're wrong. It's a sign that you're human, and that you care. But don't let guilt stop you from being honest with yourself." I nodded, but inside I knew everything had become more complicated. Because on Sunday night, when this weekend ended, I would have to go back home, would have to look my wife in the eyes. And I didn't know how to do that, knowing I would never be the same person again. On Sunday, we spent the day together. Nothing extraordinary happened, just walking, talking, sitting on the beach, watching people pass by. Yet every moment felt charged with an electric intensity, because we both knew our time was fleeting. At night, on the last night, we went back to that same spot on the beach where he had kissed me, and this time, there was no hesitation. We kissed again, this time with more urgency, with more intensity, as if we wanted to capture every second of that moment before it slipped away. And when we pulled apart, he looked at me and said, "I don't know what's going to happen after this. I don't know if we'll see each other again, but I want you to know that this was real, and that it changed something in me too." I held his hand and said, "It changed everything in me." We stayed there until late, until I had to leave, until reality started knocking at the door again. When I got back to my room, I sat on the bed and realized I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't go back to my life as if nothing had happened, because something had happened. Something big, something that showed me who I really am. And on Monday morning, when I packed my bag and got in the car to drive home, I knew everything had changed. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how I was going to deal with it, but I knew one thing. I couldn't live a lie anymore. I drove in silence, my heart heavy, my mind racing. And the only question I could ask was, what now? Because the question was no longer what had happened that weekend. The question was what I was going to do with the truth he had shown me. When I got home that Monday night, my wife was in the kitchen. She looked at me and asked if everything was okay. I smiled, said yes, that it was just a different weekend. But she kept looking. She knew my face better than I did myself. "There's something different about you," she said. "I can't explain what it is." I hugged her, said everything was fine, but inside something was breaking. Because for the first time in my life, I knew that things weren't fine. And I had no idea how to fix it. The week crawled by, an endless parade of performative normalcy. I went to work, smiled, played my part doing everything a successful 35-year-old married man was supposed to do. But behind the facade, every time I closed my eyes, I was transported back to that beach. And each time someone casually asked if I was okay, a sudden painful lump would rise in my throat. Because the weekend at the beach had broken something in me that I couldn't repair anymore. I had seen something about myself that I couldn't ignore anymore. And the more I tried to pretend everything was normal, the more I felt like I was betraying everyone. Her, myself, even him. 3 weeks went by like this. 3 weeks where I looked at myself in the mirror in the morning and barely recognized who was looking back. 3 weeks where every "I love you" I said to my wife felt true, but incomplete. Because I loved her. I really did. But it wasn't the kind of love she deserved. And that destroyed me. Have you ever pretended to be someone for so long that you forgot who you really were? Because that's what happened to me. I hadn't woken up one day and decided to be gay. I had woken up and realized I always was. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. And there will come a time when you won't be able to hold it in anymore. You'll have to let it out. For me, that time came on a Thursday night. We were having dinner, and my wife was talking about plans for our wedding anniversary. 10 years together. 10 years of a life that looked perfect on paper. And I looked at her and thought, she deserves someone who loves her the right way, and I deserve to stop lying. So I took a deep breath and said, "We need to talk." What happened next was one of the most difficult and most important conversations of my life. I'm not going to go into all the details because some moments are just ours, but I'll tell you the essentials. I told the truth. I said that the weekend at the beach had shown me something about myself that I'd been denying for years. That it wasn't about her, it was about me. That I loved her as a person, but that I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't. She cried. I cried. There was anger, confusion, questions I didn't know how to answer. She asked me if I was sure, if it wasn't just a phase, if there was someone else. And I said yes, there was. Not another relationship, but another version of me that I couldn't hide anymore. And you know what was most incredible? In the middle of all that pain, in the middle of all that confusion, she told me something I'll never forget. I always knew there was something, she said. I just didn't know what. And now I know. It wasn't easy. It was brutal. It was painful. It was devastating for both of us. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something I had forgotten what it was. Freedom. The freedom to be honest. The freedom to stop lying. Separating was complicated. Explaining it to family was even worse. My parents didn't understand at first. My dad didn't speak to me for months. My mom cried every time we talked. My friends? Some stayed, some disappeared. And that's okay. I understood. Because when you make a choice like that, you're not choosing between right and wrong. You're choosing between perpetuating a lie or embracing your truth. And the truth, raw and unfiltered, always wounds before it liberates. 3 months after the separation, I sent him a message. The guy from the beach. I didn't know if he would respond. I didn't know if he still remembered me. But I had to try. He responded the same day and said, I was waiting for you to reach out. The first time we saw each other again was at a cafe. Nothing romantic, nothing cinematic. Just two men having coffee and talking. But it was perfect, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't pretending to be anyone else. He asked me if I was okay with everything, if I was sure. And I said, I wasted years pretending. I'm not going to waste another day. And that's how it all began. Not with fireworks, not with background music, but with honesty, with courage, with the choice to stop lying to myself. Today, 6 months later, my life is completely different. I'm dating him. My family is adjusting slowly. Some have accepted it, others are still processing. And that's okay, because for the first time in 35 years, I'm finally myself. It's not perfect. There are difficult days. There are moments where I wonder if I made the right choice. But then I look at him, I look at my life, and I know I did. Because authenticity is worth more than comfort. Because honesty is worth more than ease. And if you're watching this now and something resonated with you, I want you to know one thing. You're not alone. I'm not claiming you feel this way too. But if you do, I want you to know there's nothing wrong with it, and I truly understand. Because life changes the question. And sometimes, love appears where we least expect it. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can pretend you didn't see it, or you can have the courage to live. I chose to live. And it wasn't easy, but it was the best decision I ever made. You don't need to decide anything right now. Just don't lie to yourself. Because in the end, the only person who needs to understand your journey is you. And if this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel. Here we share real stories about love that defies expectations, about the courage to be who you truly are, about journeys that truly matter. Your story deserves to be lived, and you deserve to be seen. He's 35 years old and finally free, and you can be too.